previously on 1301, we learned about Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and how they all flow together to create the unified story of the gospel. Okay, starting with Joshua, Joshua starts by Moses' death, and so there's a transition in leadership from Moses to Joshua. So Joshua has all the leadership, and no one succeeds Joshua. And so Joshua starts by sending spies into the land, and this time it's successful, and he sends them in, and then he takes the Israelites to the promised land through the Jordan River, which is significant in some sense. Once fulfilling God's promise, but it's also similar to how before when Moses went, like, he took them through the Red Sea, because God parted it. So basically what else happens is there's Jericho and there's Ai, and Jericho shows God's faithfulness, like they're faithful and they're obedient to God, while Ai just tries to take it into their own hands, and it just shows Israel's utter failure. Okay, so towards the end of Joshua, God is saying, like, to the Israelites to get rid of the Canaanites, and essentially he just doesn't want them to end up following in the Canaanites' path, in this, like, disobedience, and this moral corruption that they have, but he doesn't literally mean destroy, because throughout the verses he's still talking about them as they're in it. He just means to, like, get them out of the land so that they will not rub off on Israel, which that doesn't end up working because they don't complete it. But basically at the end of Joshua, he gives 2 speeches, and he's like, are we going to serve the Lord or are you not? Like, you have 2 choices. And then that's going to lead us into the book of Judges. Okay, so in the book of Judges, it starts with the death of Joshua. And so the book of Judges is basically just about, like, the land. It doesn't have a king. Like, it's just governed by judges. And when you think of judges, you may think of, like, in a court system. But in this book, it's talking about these military leaders, and just different people that are, like, ruling over the land, but they're not kings. And so this, within this book, it's showing Israel's moral corruption, because they're no better than the Canaanites. They're being disobedient, they're not listening, and so basically after Joshua dies, this, the Judges cycle is what it's called, it happens. So it's sin, oppression, repentance, deliverance, and then peace. But for the most part, the Judges cycle is just this sin and oppression, because they are acting as the Canaanites would, and then, you know, they go into repentance and deliverance, and then into the peace, but they just keep going in this cycle. And since they don't have a king or any stable leadership, it's just causes this reoccurring problems, because they hadn't listened to God originally when he told them to exile or, you know, separate themselves from the Canaanites. So it just continues to be a problem throughout Judges. So there's some key themes throughout Samuel that are expressed in chapter 2. So it's God opposes the proud and exalts the humble. This is how, this is a main one throughout it, because David was a humble king, and Saul was not. He was prideful, which caused his downfall in the end. And then God's gonna raise up a Messianic king is another one. So once again, David was just a shepherd boy, but he was humble and he was obedient. So God was able to use him, and it just shows how God can use anyone, any circumstances. Okay, so lastly, in the book of Kings, it is talking about the division of the kingdom. And so this is the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And so most of these kings, they were leading God's people astray by leading them into these patterns of idolatry and injustice. And the kings falling away from faithfulness ultimately led to their downfall. So the kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians, and the kingdom of Judah by the Babylonians. And so when Judah was conquered by the Babylonians, they were led out of this promised land, this land that God had promised them, and they were taken away to Babylon, and they no longer had God's promise, and that's how they ultimately lost it all. Okay, so that's the recap of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and how each book fits together to create one unified story of the gospel.